Hello, Watem here, and welcome back to some more Higurashi When They Cry. I was going to end it after, end it for the night after the last part, but I wasn't able to deal with the cliffhanger that I left for the rest of you. That's right, I'm skipping straight ahead. I don't have to wait like the rest of you plebs. This is a privilege only I and the people who are binging this all in one go get to experience. Anyway, let's continue. I'm going to see how everyone reacts. So, yeah, I feel like there's more that she knows that we haven't been told yet. I'm going to ascertain what friendship is all about. With a nod of my own, I opened my mouth and began to explain.
ひなみざわにはある特別な病気があるのです。その病気の名前は仮なのか正式なのか分かりませんですが、ひなみざわ症候群と呼ばれていますです。
Everyone glanced back and forth at each other when I mentioned the term. They'd never heard of it before. The name Hinamizawa syndrome has actually been around since before the war. It's the general term for the severe homesickness and mental instability that people from Hinamizawa experience when outside of the village. People in Hinamizawa have refused to leave the village since the era of Unfuchi. Oh. Maybe that was behind some of Shion's wanting to come back. The villagers believed that they'd be cursed by Urashira-sama if they left, and people who did often came back because of that curse. In general, it used to be thought of as only severe homesickness. During the war, soldiers from Hinamizawa became mentally deranged in faraway places. That does sometimes happen in war. What was unique about the soldiers from Hinamizawa was the way that they killed their own comrades and committed suicide at the end. One doctor became curious about these cases and studied those soldiers. Irie? That's when they found out it was actually a disease only found in Hinamizawa. According to this doctor, their strange behavior was not the result of their culture. It was a mental disease triggered by external circumstances. A mental disease with an external cause is different from a psychological illness. It's a result of some kind of physical disorder, and it causes people to become mentally unstable when something triggers it. There are three categories of externally caused mental diseases: traumatically induced, substance abuse induced, and chemical imbalance induced. Traumatically induced disorders are the cases resulting from damage to the brain from trauma or infection that influences the mind. This is the reason personalities can change as a result of head injuries. Substance abuse, as the name suggests, refers to cases where drugs, especially alcohol or stimulants, have influenced the mind. Oh, were they by trauma? Are we talking like blanket trauma, or are we talking about? Because when they first said trauma, I first thought like actually physically being hit. But are they also talking about perhaps like traumatic experiences as well, even if you aren't physically hurt? Because like, yeah, I was first thinking like blunt force trauma. Anyway, alcohol stimulants have influence for mind. Why the button's not working? There you go. The last category is chemical imbalances. I was mixing up words there. I'm totally not drunk. There are cases where some ailment in the patient's body causes abnormal secretions of bodily chemicals, which then influence the brain's functions. This may sound odd, but it's been said that people tend to become depressed when they have a cold. We've all experienced the ways in which physical sickness can cause the build-up of negative emotions. However, With chemical imbalances, the cause is more direct. People's emotions aren't born from our hearts. Everyone should know, logically, that they're the result of chemicals secreted by the organs in our bodies necessary. So when the organs operating the secretion of those emotional controllers malfunction, it causes them to secrete abnormal amounts. The thyroid gland, for example, secretes hormones that regulate emotions. When that gland is defective, the balance of those hormones becomes unstable. This can cause people to not only have a physical sickness, but also a mental sickness such as depression. People don't get mentally ill just because of mental problems. Human beings are made out of meat. They get mentally ill when that meat is defective. That's certainly a description. The doctor studying Hinamizawa syndrome also came up with a theory. He suggested that there is a pathogen endemic to Hinamizawa that, if it strays too far from home, affects the chemicals in their brain and causes them to hallucinate. The villagers' belief in Oyashiro-sama certainly related to this endemic disease. People in Onagafuchi village knew about this syndrome. They knew that they couldn't survive outside the village. They also didn't want anyone else to enter the village because they would get infected too. They took this disease as a curse, not a sickness. The most significant symptoms of this disease are antisocial behavior and an extreme persecution complex. The eventual suicide caused by defects in the lymph nodes are also another unique characteristic. Oh, and I'm pretty sure, lymph nodes are, you've got some in your throat. They're, what's it called? The like really well-known thing in your throat which isn't really needed anymore and just slowly being evolved out. That's got its own name. But yeah, like that thing, maybe I remember that it's something to do with lymph nodes, whether it's got like a high concentration of them or something else. I guess that's why they scratch up their throats though. In any case, the unusual behavior of terminal patients is what inspired the legend of the demons coming out of the swamp and attacking the villagers. Just thinking of the response afterwards in the epilogues when they concrete over the swamp. I'm guessing the swamp has something to do with the disease. Basically, sick villagers developed severe persecution complexes and wound up killing other villagers. After a long time, survivors of the disease started to comprehend its quote-unquote rules. They discovered that the disease is incurable once you contract it. Or contract it. That's why they started barring outsiders from entering the village. Also, once you become ill, you will begin developing a persecution complex. This can happen to anyone in the village. The doctrine of Oyashiro-sama says that the blood of humans and demons was mixed together, and that Oyashiro-sama has control over the violent blood of the demons. People said that you'd be cursed if you didn't follow Oyashiro-sama's rules. However, I also remember how Rika said in all of the routes, Mion never did. So maybe there's something else to it as well? That could also be understood to mean that as long as you followed Oyashiro-sama's rules, you could cope with this endemic disease. This is what it meant by the scripture in Oyashiro-sama's legend that said they appeared, unified with demons and humans, all the way around, and made them live together in this village. Then there was the most important part, the rules to prevent symptoms from appearing. Those rules were the taboos, and people were strictly taught that Oyashiro-sama would curse them if they broke those rules. The horrible, bloody traditions of the village were probably performed in order to force people to respect those taboos. These taboos. Yeah. There are several ways to keep the disease under control. There are two main conditions for doing so. The first one is to prevent suspicion. If a villager is suspicious of someone, it can trigger their persecution complex, which can lead to them developing terminal symptoms. That's why they made sure to have such a tightly knit community, so that people wouldn't suspect each other. Since the terror of Oyashiro-sama's curse is emphasized, many don't know this, but she is also the god of marriage and neighborly love. However, this condition is not as important as the other one. Indeed, Oyashiro-sama isn't even recognized as god of friendship in Hinamizawa anymore. It is only worshipped as such in Okonomiya's Hirasaka district. Now, for the other condition. This one is much clearer and was practiced more strictly, not leaving the village. If the villagers leave Hinamizawa, they will fall ill quickly, proportional to the distance from the village. Villagers nowadays will not get sick as rapidly, even if they leave town or even go out of country for a long time. However, long ago, they would fall ill as soon as they left the village. It's very unfortunate that Keiichi got infected so soon after he moved to the village. It was also very unfortunate that he got sick just because he left the village for a few days to go to his relative's funeral in that one world. Oh. 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 I didn't even think about that. Oh. That caught me completely off guard. Oh, that's why Hanyu felt so bad for him that one time and kept on apologizing over and over. Although, no matter how much he apologized, he never heard her voice. He just heard her footsteps. This turned into a long discussion. These rules etched around Oyashiro-sama's curse represent the ancient wisdom of how to cope with Hinamizawa syndrome. I'm guessing she didn't say those last parts out loud. Is there any way to use this mental disease for military purposes? The aforementioned doctor insisted there was, but the military didn't listen to him at all at the time. They were interested in developing a weapon that could make a drastic change to war efforts. They didn't have any money to spare for the research of a strange disease. For I'm reminded of, I think Churchill spending a whole lot of money on an iceberg aircraft carrier, which didn't end up working in the slightest. In this way, research on Hinamizawa syndrome was abandoned. Then the war ended. Japan started its reconstruction under American leadership. However, some powerful people in the political world didn't want to accept the American way of thinking. Some of them were fired by the GHQ, but they still stayed on as advisors to the government, since Japan has a culture of respecting the elderly. Eventually, a political organization was formed, the object of which was to restore Japan to the way it was before the war. In the beginning, this organization was a very small group. It was just a gathering of 2 or 3 individuals who shared the same ideals, blowing hot air at a restaurant. Those 2 or 3 hit it off with each other, and grew to the size of a class reunion. That group became a rather sizable organization, eventually becoming a political one. Well, it would be more accurate to call them a secret society. This secret society eventually came to be called by the name of the place where it was based, Tokyo. So when we've been referring to Tokyo all this time, I'm also just reminded of how Keiichi's parents often have to go back to Tokyo. Is there perhaps some connection there, after all? There are many mysteries about Tokyo. One thing I knew for sure was it was composed of old men from Japan's political stage, ones with strong powers to indirectly influence the government and vast assets meant they could work from the shadows. They were also connected to various corporations, and their goal was to return Japan to the way it was before the war. Of course, that was a pretty ridiculous goal. There was nothing more than an idea in their minds immediately after the war, back when they were still bowing their heads to the occupation forces of those white barbarians. Once Japan's post-war reconstruction began, Tokyo steadily became a shell of its former self. But it didn't totally become a shell. It culled the fat. Japan regained its peace, and years passed. However, some people still continue to believe that Japan had been better before the war, and they were determined to return the country to those times. So this Tokyo plotted how to restore pre-war Japan from many angles. Oh. Maybe Great Hinamizawa disaster is somehow spreading the disease across Japan, so that it affects everyone in Japan, and so they all like have to stay in Japan, and then nationalism. That's basically what my thought process was. Japan has no nuclear armaments due to the three non-nuclear principles. I suppose this is still Cold War era. 83? Yeah. I think that's before Berlin Wall came down. And I can just check quickly. It's... when was collapse of Yeah, so before the collapse of Berlin Wall. In other words, this country has to brown-nose America as long as they hold nuclear weapons. The number one priority of Tokyo is to be independent from America. They want this country to be on equal footing, and to obtain a weapon of mass destruction that isn't nuclear in nature. That was the reason why they started thinking about utilizing Hinamizawa syndrome. However, they couldn't study this disease openly. In order to utilize it for military purposes, they had to hide the existence of the disease itself. Is this like nuclear weapons testing, except biological weapons testing? Is that the cause of the disaster? Did I read that last line? In order to utilize it for military purposes, they had to hide the existence of the disease itself, so they enlisted one young researcher, Kyosuke Irie. I need to make it clear that Irie isn't some far-right supporter of this secret society. He's just a young, capable doctor and an earnest researcher. He published an innovative thesis, but other academics thought he was too radical. I mean, yeah. Just because someone's working with some extremist group doesn't mean that they're a supporter of them. It's just, you know, research funding has to come from somewhere, right? Oh dear. Like I think there's a semi-famous example of a McGill professor, who, like, his research funding got cut, so he ended up working with like some kind of terrorist organization. Originally, his research was something along the lines of like basically a cannon to launch things into orbit. But cannons to launch things into orbit is also useful as cannons to launch things at other things. So yeah. Anyway, moving on. However, that convinced Tokyo that he was the only researcher suitable to study Hinamizawa syndrome. As someone young and ambitious, Irie was thrilled to take on the project of studying this rare disease with a large budget, a large staff, and his own facility. But researching the disease would mean that he'd end up infected too. No one would want to take on such a dangerous task, research. He really was too young, with his other option being wearing down his youth working hard at the night shift for a local practice. He wanted to answer the expectations of the sponsor who carefully selected him. In the end, Irie was able to uncover that, as hypothesized, the Hinamizawa syndrome was a unique infectious disease, and he developed both a treatment and a vaccine. Irie was extremely talented. The Irie Institute was formed to study the disease. Irie was nominally the head of the organization, but Tokyo still sent out a supervisor, because when all was said and done, he was just a researcher. The supervisor was Mio Takano. Takano's job at the institute was to act as a go-between for Tokyo and Irie, manage research progress, and preserve its secrecy. The latter was the most important part of her job. She had to do her best to prevent people from finding out that Irie was researching the disease, or even that the disease exists at all. The mountain dogs were formed for that purpose. They were under Takano's command, and their job was to prevent the Institute's secrets from being discovered. The mountain dogs are one special forces unit, specializing in unconventional warfare, owned by Tokyo with its vast influence on the SDF. Tokyo had set their eyes on the likelihood that a small elite squad of covert operatives would be a trump card of the anti-nuke era. So they vigorously investigated those options. This was a worldwide trend. Since the Cold War, everyone avoided sending troops directly to their enemy's doorsteps. Japan was also trying to be part of that world. While trying to leave that world, in a way. As a result, by 1983, even the police have been forming secret special forces units. Prefectural Police Squad 2, the ones who intervened when Renault laid siege to a school, changed their name to Zero Company and grew into an anti-terrorism squad that handled hijackings around the Kansai airport area. The National Police Agency Squad 6 was formed as a counter-terrorism squad for Narita Airport 2, and they later changed their name to 7th Company as well. They theorized that in a world where nations possess nukes they can't use, small elite special forces disrupting metropolitan areas would be the new way of waging war. So, in 1977, they developed the SAT's predecessor, the Special Task Force SAP, to serve as the National Police Agency's trump card in securing the peace. Likewise, Japan Coast Guard established their Special Task Force, the SST, in anticipation of unconventional warfare on the coast. There are several known Special Forces units in Japan. When they hear a phrase like Special Forces, most people tend to think of a movie or a comic book. However, these units actually exist, and are protecting Japan in secret. During the famous incident of suspicious boats off the coast of Noto Peninsula, the news reported that the helicopter squad trained in gun battles was heading there, but was recalled because the suspicious boat sank. That was because the Coast Guard's SST acted. However, the news never mentions the SST or any other Special Forces unit. All of these units were established after Tokyo made a suggestion about it to the government. Researching military tactics under the name of peace and order worked perfectly for Tokyo. But since the mid-century anti-war movement made people resent those forces, these special units have been kept secret as of 1983. Furthermore, these units are not all formed under the jurisdiction of the police. There are still many other military units that are kept secret from the average citizen. The mountain dogs are actually one of those special units. They specialize in kidnapping, espionage, and preserving secrecy. You might as well call them an assassination unit. They were around during the Dam conflict as well. Oh. Oh. Tokyo worked to put an end to the Dam project because of the impact it would have on Irie's research. How much of it was their influence? I'm thinking kidnapping the minister's son, because that's within their MO. What about the like killing the foreman? Is that part of their doing as well? Perhaps. The mountain dogs are the ones who kidnapped the Minister of Construction's grandson. Not son, never mind. Most people believe that the Sonozaki family was at the center of the movement, but in reality the mountain dogs are responsible for many of the things the Sonozakis are accused of. In that sense, the existence of the Sonozaki family was an advantage to those. Their main job after the Dam conflict ended has been to continue keeping the disease hidden from the public. With the spread of information networks in the modern age, the media jumped onto any unusual incident and quickly aired it to the whole nation. Tokyo doesn't want the disease to be known nationwide, since they're trying to utilize it for their own purposes. The main task of the mountain dogs is to kidnap people suffering from Hinamizawa syndrome. They pose as gardeners, but in actuality they patrol the village to make sure nothing strange happens. They're the ones who demon away people who go missing. They're probably involved in some of the mysterious deaths too. The last important person is Jiro Tomitake. I don't know his real name. He was an auditor who was sent from Tokyo 4 times a year. He came to check on the progress of research and outlined requests from Tokyo. He discussed the research budget with Irie too. He also got the observation report on Irie from Takano. That was his purpose. Irie started out by studying the autopsy results of dead villagers, and he discovered many answers from that. In 1979, the mountain dogs kidnapped the culprit behind the murder of the construction chief, who was a terminal patient of Hinamizawa syndrome. The nature of the disease was dramatically clarified. Their research made rapid progress after that. They discovered a vaccine, medication, and other methods of treatment for the disease. At the same time, they continued to investigate how to utilize it for military purposes. One of the interesting findings of research was that the pathogen can only be found when the patient is still alive. On top of that, they couldn't detect the presence of the pathogen at all unless they used a certain inhumane method. In other words, it's virtually impossible to detect the pathogen by normal means. It left almost no trace. The unusual symptoms it produced seemed like voluntary behavior, so they concluded that the disease could be used to their advantage. However, Tokyo has been going through some changes. It's been almost 50 years since the war ended. Leaders in the shadows behind Japan's government, who ruled from the center of Tokyo, began growing infirm, opening up seats, steadily passing their leadership to the new generation. The whole organization has started to shift. Of course, the purpose of Tokyo has stayed the same. It's still a secret society of ultranationalists who want Japan to be at the top of the world. However, their ambition to start a war with America and take over the world has diminished. Tokyo has directed its priorities towards the economy, international affairs, and education. That doesn't mean that those ambitions are gone entirely, however. Several seniors still alive retain those ambitions. Tokyo continues to finance military research. But for the present day Tokyo, Irie's research is actually something of an embarrassment. The new Tokyo is no longer interested in this project, and they announced that they are going to cut their budget as soon as those seniors pass away. However, Irie objected to that plan. He strongly appealed for a continuation of his research. This is what Tokunoki was talking about. Irie is in disagreement with Tokyo. Irie's research has been making great progress. They've discovered various treatments and testing methods, and he's even starting to develop a treatment plan for the whole village. If they cut his funding, Irie's research would end without any results. Tokyo had a discussion with Irie through Tomitake, and they decided to shut down his research partially, but not fully. However, they told him to immediately stop researching military applications of disease and destroy all the research data related to that. And Kana's in disagreement with that, which is why he's doing this whole thing, I'm guessing. Although I'm guessing there's more reasons for why she's doing that. In any case, I'll end it here for today. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments. And until next time, see ya!